All right, what can I help you with?
So I'm currently just a few days out from getting into a immersive boot camp, and most of my questions pertain to actually succeeding, getting through the boot camp with as many high quality results as possible. And I'm not under the impression, Don, that I'm going to be having a job like the day that I get out of boot camp. But my goal really with this call is to learn your insight on how to kind of narrow that gap between getting out of boot camp and landing that first developer position. So I have some specific questions. If it's okay with you, I'll get into the first one.
Sounds good. Let's dive into it.
The first thing I'm really curious about is kind of judging my competency on kind of when to start working on projects, and similarly what the benchmark is, or if there is any benchmarks that you're kind of familiar with or have seen before for beginning to get into the interview process, filling out applications, and actually trying to prospect for interviews actively. I don't know if that totally makes sense to you, but I'm primarily curious if there's a specific time and place that you get in learning how to code where it makes sense. Like, yes, let's jump into the interview process. Let's start working, spending a lot of my time on projects rather than like actively spending time in the classroom on tutorials, etc. Or if I'm just separating something that's kind of more cohesive. So,
I don't think there's an official benchmark or line in the sand where you cross it. Now let's go hardcore with the interviews. One thing I'm concerned about is there are a lot of people in your shoes. They get into a coding boot camp. They want to hit the ground running. That's important to them. The problem is I see so many people pull their focus away from the learning, from the coding boot camp, from the coding boot camp's process. And I see that being more of a detriment than anything. So my big recommendation, like my main recommendation, is just follow the process with the coding bootcamp. Hit up admissions before you even get into it. How can I best prepare for this? I really want to excel at this. I want to take this seriously. It's going to look good as a good statistic for them if you are very well prepared for this. And so like the main advice is follow their process, and hopefully they're giving you supplemental material. And what you can do, the further you get into the coding bootcamp, you're going to realize, okay, these are the things that I probably need to reinforce, right? These are the things I need to practice. And so as you get more comfortable, as you get more skills, you're going to figure out how to apply them to actual projects, to real solutions, real coding solutions. So as you get further, you're going to become more knowledgeable, and then you're going to be able to build things that are going to be able to reinforce those more advanced concepts that you're learning. But you're not going to know in the beginning. It's really hard to prepare for this at the beginning because you don't really know what you don't know. And it's very hard to translate them into an actual project that employers are going to care about that solves a real problem. So my main advice is just follow the process. What you can do, because every coding bootcamp, you got to supplement something. If they aren't heavy with project work, especially with the second half, you can build your own project. Think about the things that you've been learning. What can I build to go ahead and reinforce these concepts? So what you might consider doing is just like having a project in mind in the beginning, and then let it slowly evolve into something with features that are going to reinforce what you're learning. And you can kind of just build it on the side a little bit. And this project, you don't really need to build features that make sense. You just need to build features that reinforce what you're learning. This isn't the type of project that's going to be this amazing portfolio project. It's a project where you practice and reinforce what you're learning.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, my first few projects, I'm not getting a startup going or anything. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I like how you mentioned the idea of actually applying it to the real world. I've been self-teaching for several months, and I gotta say, that's been the biggest challenge for me, is first off getting, troubleshooting in the first place. That's just been a process of learning in and of itself. But more impactful has been not only seeing kind of where a coding concept applies in the real world, so kind of learning those concepts and implementing them into projects gradually over time seems like a really solid way to go. So
yeah, and like you've also asked a question like, when do I know to like really start applying and pushing forward with that? Again, just to answer that question, it's the Coding Bootcamp to Career Services is probably going to let you know about that. I would just push that more towards the end of the program. You're going to figure out. You're going to build projects probably throughout the program. Your projects are going to evolve into more kind of like products, portfolio ready projects that solve a real problem that is going to be directly translatable. But to like when you start like really preparing and going heavy into the interview process as well, it's going to start off slow. It's kind of just like a little bit of a curve. You start off slow, a few applications maybe. Like 3 applications a week, you're doing company research, cover letter, and then you let that progress into like if you're applying, even when you graduate. And I know this isn't exactly the question you asked, but hopefully this is helpful. But when you graduate, then you're kind of still going hardcore with projects, but then it's maybe up to 15 applications. If you're applying full time, it's up to 15 applications per week. I would cap it at that and just do heavy project work.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Just based on what you've seen being in the industry, talking about portfolios specifically, I'm sure I'll get some insight from this from my boot camp as well. But there's a lot of conflicting information online when it comes to kind of building out a portfolio. Do you have any personal recommendations with building one? Do you recommend building a portfolio completely from scratch, doing just throwing boilerplate in there and getting all of the UX and all of the functionality built out? Do you sometimes recommend using templates, or is it a mix of the two? I'm just kind of curious about that, because especially watching some of your recent portfolio reviews, it seems like there's some things to be learned about design that could be implemented into building a cohesive portfolio. So I just was kind of interested on your input on that particular issue.
Yeah. Is your coding bootcamp more focused on front end or back end?
It's full stack. So it's going to be the MERN stack. And then we're also learning Python and Django, which I like and dislike. It seems like quite a bit of technology to learn in a relatively short time period. So I am concerned just a little bit about the depth of each particular topic. But that said, I'm also excited to get a broad exposure to a lot of different technologies. So.
Gotcha. So every single program, whether they say full stack or not, focuses on front end or back end. And so that's a good question to ask admissions even before you start, I think, because it's important to know what you're going to need to supplement. And also, as you go through the coding bootcamp, you're probably going to find that you lean more towards, I'm interested in front end, I'm interested in back end. So if there's any interest in applying for front end positions specifically, I think it's really important to care about UX. I think it's really like, you don't have to be a designer. You don't have to design this amazing portfolio, but you need to understand like professional front-end developers care about the content they're displaying on the page. They have that context in mind. They care about the UX. They care about like even just placement of items. Like you'll notice even front-end engineers, when they build their own side projects, they're not designers. But their sites, whatever they're building, it looks pretty good. Why is that? Because they put a focus in front-end, and they've kind of like, they picked up tips for design, and they put attention towards that. And so I think a lot of companies hiring for front end, they're going to care about that you put that effort in. Learning a little bit, like becoming a little bit UX savvy is very important for a front end developer, even in just the communications you're going to have with the designer. You showing that you care about that kind of thing, and at least making, spacing is consistent with your portfolio, and like the color contrast I can read it. Like focusing on things like that matters. So I would focus on the basics and fundamentals if you can. I don't think your design needs to be amazing. If you want to go with a templated approach, that's fine. I think like the portfolio itself, I think should speak a little bit to your personality, which is where templates can take away from that. But it's the most uninteresting project you're going to be building as well. And so if you have a focus to like really double down on this other project that you think is very impressive, and like you're able to like have a really constructive conversation about all the features and why you built those features, like what problems they actually solve, how you implemented them in the interview. That's an important conversation. So it's like, should you build a portfolio and get a little bit savvy with UX and kind of like add your own flavor to it? Yes, that can benefit you, but it's not the thing that's going to bring you the most value.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Speaking to the emphasis on front end or back end, the bootcamp I'm going to is definitely front end emphasized. Do you typically recommend that people try to get a relatively deep understanding of both sides of the tech stack, or specifically juniors, or do you recommend going much deeper into one or the other? What are your opinions on that?
It depends on what you. So you're going to keep going as deep as you need to go until you figure out what you want to do. And that's the extent. That's as far as you're going to go. In my opinion, a lot of front-end developers, like when you dive into a full stack curriculum, a lot of front-end developers they're told that they're supposed to learn back-end because it's going to make them more marketable. But I find that their front-end skills just suck. They do. And they haven't spent enough time with front-end. So like, ideally, would it be beneficial for you to learn the full stack? Sure. And I think having context of the entire full stack is important. It's going to improve your communication with backend developers. It's going to you're going to understand more context, and it's just going to make you a better developer. And you're also going to learn different patterns on the backend versus front end usually. So can it benefit you? Yes. Is that going to be the most efficient way of landing your first job? Probably not. Like there's so much depth in the front end. There's so much depth in the back end to be competitive.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it seems like I'm relatively confident that the front end is where I'm going to be pursuing primarily initially. So it seems to me like having some understanding of the back end is very, and the back end is a totally esoteric topic to me. So I have no clue what I'm talking about as of yet, but it seems like just having some core competencies to be able to even talk to a full stack or back end developer is a decent place to be if I am going into the front end primarily right off the bat.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it can help. That exposure can help you in seeing how all the pieces fall into place. But the problem is when people graduate, they make the mistake of doubling down on the full stack. They don't pick one still. And that's where developers kind of shoot themselves in the foot with that. So once you graduate, make sure you know what you want to focus on.
Yeah. Good at one, not terrible at both.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Okay. My next question is primarily, it's a more of a career question than anything. What I'm interested in your experience, what you have done throughout your career as like going from, I believe you started as a W-9, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what are some other avenues that have you done any freelancing? Have you been in the startup world at all? Do you have any insights into these things? I'm interested.
Wait, actually, hold on.
Yeah.
What is a W-9? I want to make sure I have this correct.
Oh, a W-9 is being an employee of another company.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, not at all. I'm really just curious on getting your insight on some other potential avenues to take within the career of being a developer. So I don't know personally if you've done any of these things, but like as far as like working in startups, freelancing, and then obviously you have experience as a content creator. What are your insights into the like going into freelancing, being in the startup world? Do you have anything to say about those particular experiences compared to being a W-9 employee?
When you say going into the startup world and you compare that with being a W-9 employee, what's the difference?
Yeah, sorry. Working with a more established company, not necessarily like a FAANG company, but a company that has secured funding and is relatively profitable as opposed to a business that's just starting, needs a lot of capital to continue running, and may or may not blow up in the next year or so.
Gotcha.
The startup world being much more quick, like typically much more quickly paced than like, something that's a little more established.
Yeah, because startup world could definitely mean a couple different things. I've definitely worked in the startup world, but they had their funding for me. Okay. I mean, somewhat. My first company laid off a ton of employees, but I have never freelanced for money before. I considered that route when I was becoming a developer. All my experience and knowledge with that comes from just mentoring people that have. So just to give that disclaimer. Okay. I guess my first question would be like, what is your objective with aiming for something like freelancing or something that's just going to pay like equity and it's going to be a big risk?
So I'm frankly, I'm waiting to get into the industry to kind of get my bearings to fully decide to make a pivot or make a decision of this nature. So just that's my disclaimer is I'm speaking primarily from a lack of experience and curiosity. Currently, like most of my adult life, I've just run small service-based businesses, and being able to work for myself has always been something that's been certainly not essential, but it definitely increases the quality of my life and lifestyle, I would say. So that is something that I would like to potentially over the mid to long term be pursuing after getting into developing full time for a period of at least several years and gaining a lot of core competencies and sort of just really getting my bearings as a developer. I will certainly be analyzing different potential exits, either into full-time entrepreneurship, freelancing on the side, or something in between those two that I haven't even heard of yet because of my lack of exposure to the industry thus far. Okay, so it sounds like you might long-term be looking for an exit into entrepreneurship. Potentially, yeah. I'm certainly leaving that possibility open. So, gotcha. I don't think it's something that you should focus on initially. If you get into freelancing, there are even coding boot camps that will claim you'll become a freelance developer, you'll be able to afford your bills, etc. In my experience, most freelancers will fail. They're not going to be able to afford their bills. It really aligns with the success rate from what I've seen, maybe a little bit higher, but of a lot of entrepreneurship ventures. So right. I think you can become, like, if you really want to get into freelancing down the road, I think getting professional experience, you can even start with like a product-based position. You're a developer, you're working full-time for a company, and then you can eventually transition into something like freelancing with better conventions, especially if you joined a team that did proper code reviews and, they shared their knowledge with you and wisdom. And then you took that and now you could build a much better structured app that is a little bit scalable, depending on the type of project you want to work on, but you have those good conventions to carry with you. I think that's more of a natural route that's going to increase the chances of success of you being able to do that. I think, like, even if you dove into freelancing a little bit early, you're not really going to be solving tough problems at all in the beginning. You're just building up your reputation, learning business. So I usually don't, like, if your goal in the near future is to get a full-time developer as a software engineer, toss freelancing off your list. I don't think it's worth it. Okay. You could do like a single project if you want, go to a business, build a landing page for them or whatever, they need. I think that can be beneficial, but don't put all of your focus on that. And with startup and equity, it's like or maybe they have like really volatile funding or just like limited funding, so your position could be gone the next day. It can be professional experience. I would argue, like, you could aim for a position like that. You might even just Google job boards that for smaller companies and just look for companies that are willing to take you in. It might not be a paid internship. You can negotiate at least a little bit of money, but like working there while you look for your full-time job elsewhere could also be a strategy. But it really depends on your goals. I think
what you can do with freelancing and what you can do with entrepreneurship will solidify once you actually get into the industry, and then you have to worry about your exit. I'm not sure it'd benefit you to worry about that now.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. I like that framework. I hadn't thought a whole lot about that, about kind of finding a niche within something that I'm already doing within the employed world, and just having it be more of a kind of a smooth transition rather than doing a hard break of any kind. Because I mean, a hard break would be, obviously a lot more risky, and you can like slowly build up something that is like ancillary to your employed position.
And you might even consider joining a startup with like 100 employees, right? You're going to be a developer that's going to have conversations with design, product. You're going to pick up things, and you're going to be a little bit more involved in the business. And I think that's a really beneficial place to be if your end goal, your exit, is entrepreneurship.
Okay, cool. That makes sense, Don. So cool. That's about it for me, honestly. Okay, those were the big three that I had. So I really appreciate you. If you have any other words of wisdom for me, please do. But yeah, we're basically at the end of what I had for you.
Cool. Yeah, why not? I like that you're thinking ahead. I do. I think you have the right mindset to make this coding bootcamp successful. You've prepared you've put in a few months of self-taught work into just building yourself up as a developer. You're focused. You're thinking about the projects that are going to matter. You're thinking about when to essentially like transition from kind of coding bootcamp mind into becoming a professional developer. I think these are all good questions. I just really want to reemphasize, do not toss yourself out of the coding bootcamp process too early. Be very careful about that. I see way too many graduates that'll pull themselves. They might not be happy. What you can do in the coding bootcamp is you can supplement. If you're not happy with how the coding bootcamp is teaching, it doesn't go into enough depth, for example, right? If you have extra time, you can supplement with that depth. You can build projects to reinforce it. You can look up an extra article, right? If they're not giving you those supplemental goals. So you can supplement the weak parts of your coding bootcamp, but one of the worst things that you can do is toss yourself out of their process of learning completely and just like go solo and just apply for a bunch of companies. And you know what, screw this coding bootcamp. That usually doesn't work out for people, and it's going to lengthen the amount of time to get that job.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the first time that you said that, I I wasn't planning on necessarily like shutting off the advice from the bootcamp, but that, like, the way that you put it totally makes sense. And it's also like, do you trust yourself with your own decisions? Because given the price tag of a coding bootcamp, you would think that you would have a huge amount of trust within the process of that bootcamp, given whatever amount you had to end up paying for it. So why would you betray your own trust by making an exit from the bootcamp and kind of trying to make your own way? So that's kind of the idea that went through my head when you first mentioned that. So yeah, that's very insightful and definitely something that I'll be keeping in mind.
Cool. Yeah, the important thing you got to realize is when you graduate, usually no matter what coding bootcamp you come from, you're usually like 80% of the way there anyways, and you already know what you need to supplement. So even if you made a bad choice, whoops, you can usually fix that.
Sure. Yeah, totally.
Cool.
Beautiful.
All right. Well, hey, Colby, it was nice to meet you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Don. Nice to meet you too.